So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rohingya Women Webinar Series 2021 on the topic of resistance and resilience in reclaiming narratives and reclaiming power. In this series, we will explore powerful stories, inspiration, and resilience of women whose work have been vital to the betterment of Rohingya and Myanmar Burma society. In commemoration of the resistance movement for freedom and democracy, like the 8888 Uprising, as well as the Rohingya Genocide Remembrance Day on August 25th, we cannot forget that women have been fundamental movers and shakers in all of the past and present resistance movements. It is important that their voice, their stories, and their strength are celebrated. My name is Yasminullah. I am a Rohingya human rights activist, and I will be your host today. Firstly, let me thank you all for joining us on this call, as well as those who join us via Facebook. A reminder that this is a public event and we will be recording the session and upload the video onto various social media platforms later on. This is the fifth of our webinars throughout the entirety of August. We only have 2 more sessions left, where we will be interacting, exploring, and discussing different social issues facing women of Myanmar Burma. So please stay tuned until the end, where I will be informing you of our next speakers for the remainder of August. Before I introduce you to our very special guest today, I would like to remind everyone who have joined us on Zoom to please mute yourself throughout the webinar until the question and answer session. If there are any burning questions you'd like to answer at all, please feel free to drop them in the chat box and I will be sure to ask them for you. You can tweet us at Rohingya Women Webinar, and I will be putting down the hashtag for myself and for Professor Lee. Please make sure that you use the hashtag Rohingya Women Webinar Resistance and Resilience as separate hashtags, so that your tweets can actually be linked to today's webinar. Now, this week we have the honor of speaking with an incredible human rights champion that people who work on Myanmar Profile know very well, Professor Yanghee Lee. A little bit of introduction is that Professor Lee is with the Song Kyung Kwan University Department of Child Psychology and Education. She has founded and is current president of the International Child Rights Center. Professor Lee has more than 17 years of experience in human rights. She was in the UN Committee for the Convention on the Rights of the Child for 10 years and has served as its chair for 2 terms from 2007 to 2011. From 2014 until 2020, she served as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. Professor Lee has served as the chairperson of chairpersons of treaty bodies from 2010 to 2011, as well as the chairperson of the coordinating committee of the special procedures of the United Nations Human Rights Council from 2016 to 2017. She has been the guiding force of the drafting, negotiating, and adopting of the 3rd optional protocol to the CRC on the communications procedure. Within the special procedures mechanism, Professor Lee has been instrumental in establishing the fact-finding mission on Myanmar, the FFMM, and the independent investigative mechanism on Myanmar, or the IIMM. She has recently founded the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, or SAC-M. Welcome, Professor Lee, and it's an honor to have you with us today. I believe you have an intervention you would like to start with, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Yasmin, for inviting me to this very important webinar series. I'd like to start by remembering 2017, August 25th. It should never have happened. And the way the international community addressed it was really very disappointing. And actually, what the international community saw in 2016 was also very disappointed, which emboldened the Tetmadaw to conduct its its massive genocide campaign in 2017. But we are here. I stand with you, brothers and sisters of Rohingya who are in Myanmar, who are in Rakhine State, and who are in Cox's Bazar and Bhasan Char, and those brothers and sisters who are around the world. And I'm really grateful that you've invited me, and I think this is a first time ever that, and Yasmin, when Yasmin approached me, if she can ask very personal questions to see the other side of what a special rapporteur actually does or is. And I was really surprised that I would be given this opportunity, because I hope this can serve as some, I won't say guidance, because every case is very different and I don't really have much to offer as guidance, but maybe an example of what some women can do in the fight for whatever. It could be resistance against the oppression, resistance against discrimination, or resistance against misogynistic behaviors of people around us in our communities. And I'm really looking forward to having this interactive dialogue with Yasmin. And later on, I'd be more than glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Without further ado, I think it would be important for people to understand your journey and learn from you as much as possible. So some of the questions that I have, the first one is, what was your journey like from childhood, and what inspires you to become who you are today? Who inspired you specifically, and who inspired you to pick up the work in human rights advocacy?
Well, some of you may know the history of Korea. We had been under Japanese occupation for more than 3 decades. Both my parents lived under the Japanese occupation. My father led the student movement, resisting the Japanese oppression. And my mother, on the other hand, she was a medical student, and she went to an all-female medical school back then in the 30s and 40s, 1940s, late 30s and 1940s. The co-ed schools were was non-existent almost, and she was a student at an all-female medical school. She was the president of the Female Medical Students Organization, and my father he was the president of the National Student Movement. So my parents were already fighting for human rights and democracy way back when, in the 30s and in the 40s. And so they have really inspired me. And we had a devastating Korean War in 1950. And we experienced, after independence in 1945 from Japanese colonialism, we only experienced about 5 years of a sovereign state, and the North Koreans invaded South Korea in 1950. And then by that time, my father was in the government, in politics, and he saw the Korean War. And then in 1961, we experienced our first military coup d'etat in 1961. At that time, my father was leading in the National Assembly, the Defense Committee. And he had picked up some rumors that there might be a coup d'etat. But the people in power wanted to get rid of him, so he was shoved off to the United Nations. We were not a member state. We were only able to attend United Nations as an observer state. And it was the 15th UNGA, UN General Assembly, that he was attending. And on his way back, he heard of the news of a coup d'etat. And so he couldn't come back because, as usual, when a junta regime comes in, they will put all first they will imprison all the former politicians, or they will ask you, we won't put you in prison, but we want you to endorse us and we want you to cooperate with us. And my father said no. So therefore his passport was canceled. So he had no passport. He was in Japan then, on the way back. He had no passport. But it was under the Kennedy administration. The Kennedy administration supported him. By that time, in 1961, there was no UNHCR. So he traveled with a document that said a man with no state. And he went back to the United States and we lived there for a few years. We joined him a year after, and we lived in the United States as people with no state. So in other words, as a refugee in the United States. So you can imagine the journey had started way before I was born and when I was a very young child.
Mm-hmm. Wow, just incredible. And I think that a lot of us here who are Rohingya or who are currently trying to resist against the coup within Myanmar can definitely relate to your story. And I think it's really important for us to be reminded that even though things move very slowly and things improve very slowly, it eventually will improve and will get better by drawing from your story. Thank you very much for sharing that very, very inspiring story with us. I want to move on to our next question. Since you were in exile, were there things that you have witnessed during the time of you being in exile, and things that might have shifted your reality? You said that you were in the US for a while as a refugee, and what was that like? Were there moments of your resistance against injustice that you could share with us?
Well, I was a very young child. I was in the first grade, but I remember a few things where prior to that life, I lived a very comfortable life because my father was already established as a prominent politician. But when we went to the United States, our life had turned upside down, and we lived in a very poor neighborhood. I remember our sponsors, my father's friends, who would send me boxes of their children's clothing, and I would be growing up wearing the clothes, secondhand clothes, and bicycles and toys, and that struck me like, oh my, that was very bizarre. But my mother would always say when she's unpacked she said, oh, these are so cute dresses. Oh, these are cute shorts. Oh, look at this flower. Look at this apple embroidered. And she really helped me see that it was okay. There was nothing bad wearing hand-me-down clothes as long you've had something inside. And then I went to a school. We were in inner city, mm-hmm. where the crime rate was not that bad then. It was in the early 60s. And so I went to a school where most of my classmates were from African descent. And you can imagine, I had never been in the United States, or I didn't know the language. And so, but I never witnessed any injustice. On the other hand, I experience acceptance from my neighborhood people and my classmates. Here they probably they probably thought I was Chinese, because everybody thought every Asian was Chinese back then. But there was a time when one of my friends really got me angry. And so I grabbed her and I was going to beat her up, but I was only 6. And I remember thinking vividly that if I beat her up in school, if I beat her up in the streets, I would get beat up by her friends. And so I grabbed her and I pulled her to our front of our apartment. And then I started to beat her up in front of my apartment, our apartment. And so I felt that was a safe ground, that I can beat this girl who's been making trouble for me. And my mother and father was just devastated. They thought that, oh my God, what are we going to do? And my mother talked to one of our neighbors, and my mother said, we're so scared that what might happen because we beat up one of the neighbor's child. My daughter beat up a neighbor's child, and what if her friends or uncles and family will come and start to beat us up? And the mother said, she laughed. She said, that's childhood. That's what kids do. They always beat each other up. Don't worry. And so that was the time that we really felt accepted. And they tried to understand us. It was not, you're different. And so therefore you're not with us. You're bad. And then later on, that's childhood. She and I were best friends.
It's a very, very happy ending story.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I'm so glad the experience in the US have sort of helped carved you in a way to actually have a little bit more I think understanding, right, with in terms of like diversity and understanding people that may not look like you or
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. But it was afterwards that I started to experience injustice, discrimination as I was growing up,
right,
into my teenage years, and then into college years, and in adult life. That's when I started to experience injustice and discrimination.
I think it's like a must. It's sad, but it's a must that people of color would have to go through some sort of incidents or something that would remind them of the institutional racism that exists here in North America.
We are facing double jeopardy, Yasmin.
Exactly.
Women we are of color and of also females.
Exactly.
So it's a double jeopardy.
Exactly. And if there are other things that people can alienate about us, they'll pick up on that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Switching things up a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your work. As you began your work with the Committee on the Rights of the Child, many different roles you've also taken as well at the United Nations, and that includes the United Nations Human Rights Council, where there are situations that you have had to navigate your own identity, since we were talking about that just now, and the discrimination against you as a woman and as a person of color, and any other type of discrimination that you've probably had to navigate. Are there things that you could share with us?
Yes, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and any people who work with children and for children, they're a different breed. We don't let our differences get in our way. We always try to work together. But it was when I served as the chair of the chairpersons of all treaty bodies, where all 9 treaty body chairpersons would meet annually. That's when I felt a roadblock. It was mostly boys' club. And and myself coming from a children's committee,
Mhm.
And people, some of them are my counterparts, will say, oh, the Madam Lee, the chairperson of, they won't say Committee on the Rights of the Child, they'll probably say Children's Committee. It was very patronizing.
Microaggression.
Yes. And then here I was a female. My predecessor was a Dutch male. And I guess he fit right into the boys' club. But as a female and coming from Children's Committee and somebody who is Asian, it didn't go so well, I think. My perspective, maybe I was wrong, but I remember that I had to make myself known to this body of 9 chairpersons and vice chairpersons meeting. So every agenda, it took me 3 days, but every agenda, I had my hand up. I had my hand up for every item that was discussed. And I think from the 3rd day, mid-3rd day, the men started to recognize that there was a female. There were other female members there too, but not from a children's committee. So here I felt a triple jeopardy. I was a female, I was an Asian, and I came from a children's committee.
It seems like they're doing this as like they deem this as a woman's job, or like pushing the burden to the women a little bit in that sense, that it's not respectful enough.
Absolutely. But I guess, you know, I'm sure these men did not realize that what they were doing was hurtful, because they, you know, this was just culturally, it was there. But I remember when I came, I was there for 4 years in the chairperson's meetings, but I led the group one time as the chair, and things really changed, because by that time I could see that I was, I didn't have to raise my hand for every item. They would actually say, Madame Lee, do you have anything to add to this?
That's exactly what it is taking up the space. And not making yourself small. I think a lot of
and the balance has to be there. Sometimes you have to seem very vulnerable. I say, I'm sorry, I don't know this, but I think we have to deal with this. You know?
Right. I love that approach, because I think sometimes we're so caught up in trying to know everything, trying to have everything figured out, and then by that extension, we just don't want to take up the space because we might not have expertise, or we might have some limitations to that. So I think a lot of the women from Myanmar, Burma, can definitely relate and probably resonate to a lot of these. I want to go a little bit further into, you know, your work in general now, especially about Myanmar. Some of us from Myanmar, Burma, or from human rights world may not know this, but you've received multiple awards, and one is the Order of the Civil Merit from the President of South Korea for your human rights work within the country since in 2009. And you've carried out so much more work internationally. How do you navigate both the difficulty of the work and the trauma that comes with it, and the gender discrimination that is at times infused within the system of the UN or any other structures that we live in? If you have any tips for young women today who are trying to get into this work, or who are in the journey of this sort of human rights work or democratic movement or any other resistance movement, please share with us.
Thank you, Yasmin. Let me share with you something very personal. As I said, my parents were my inspiration. And let me say a little bit about my mother. To give you 2 instances, which I think might help you understand better. And when I went to the States for college. I went away to boarding, university in the United States. You have to stay in a boarding, it's dormitories. And in my freshman year, my mother sent me a small package. And at that time, getting packages from home was just, it was too few and far in between because international postages were not that great. And it was a small package, and I was really excited to see what it was. And what I discovered was a small silk, blue silk pouch, small thing, about this size. And it was kind of heavy. And she had a letter, and she said, "Don't forget that you are the daughter of Korea." And she dug up sand, she dug up ground from our front yard, and she cut up our traditional silk dress, Korean dress, and she sewed a pouch, like a bean bag,
Right.
and she filled the earth from our garden, and she said, "Put this in your bookshelf, and always remember that you're the daughter of Korea. It's not our daughter. You're the daughter of Korea." And that kind of stifled me when I was young. But all along when I was growing up, my mother and my father would say, all around us, people would say, when boys climbed the tree, I would also climb the tree. When my cousins climbed the tree, I would climb up the tree. And everybody was in shock. They said, "How dare you let your daughter do things like that?"
Right.
It was, girls can't do this, girls can't do that. But it was my parents who said to me, "Because you're a girl, there's so much more you can do." And that always stuck with me. And how do you navigate that? And finding the right balance is very important. You don't want to be too forceful, because then you put the others on such a defensive. They'll put up a wall that you can't climb across that wall. So you have to find the right balance, but always, because you're a woman, you can do so much more. But people don't realize that. People think, oh, because you're a woman, you're blocked from doing this and that and doing this and that. But think of it in a way that use your gender to accomplish a lot more than what you probably expected.
Well, the story just make me choke a little bit. I think it's something that that we all can definitely take pride in where we're from, and ensuring that we're not completely detached from our own identity, and just remember that we can definitely do our part regardless of whether or not we're right, in the middle of the human rights work, or if we're in other professions, we're still capable of helping or resisting against the tide of injustice in some ways. And it does not have to be the same.
But you have to be firm.
Exactly.
And, you have to put your foot down sometimes. And then you have to show that, don't mess with me, kind of an attitude.
Exactly.
Let me tell you, when it was under U Tae-seng's time, towards the end of his mandate, his presidency, I remember having a meeting with the then defense minister. When I go to Naypyidaw, I meet with different ministries, and the minister comes with their entourage from my
apologies, sir.
The ministers come with their own entourage in the ministry building. Before I meet with them, they want me to send them some possible questions so they can be prepared. But what I always say, these are some questions, but there will be many more that will come up. But the ministers and the ministries use those questions as an excuse, and they will prepare answers to those questions, and they'll just read it to you. meeting times are between 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And you can imagine if they take 20 minutes to read the answers to the questions. So this Minister of Defense started to read, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, with all due respect, I've got some questions I'd like to ask you." And he looked at me and he threw up his paper and he said, "You asked me to answer these questions, but now you're asking me more questions. What is this?" And he got so upset, he almost threw a tantrum. And so I said, I sat there and looked at him straight in his eyes for 2 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't move my eyes at all. I remember not even blinking. And then he kind of got, he started to pick up his papers. And I said, "If you read in the bottom of the list, I say that these will be the basis of our discussions, and there will be many more questions asked." So this is how you have to speak up to power. Because otherwise, you're a female and they think they can walk all over you. Because that's how Asian women are supposed to behave.
Right.
Very submissive.
Exactly.
But you can't let them get away with that.
Right. So finding that balance is knowing when to speak up and when to compromise, when to be a little bit more lenient, and when to actually push your message in a little bit more forceful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes the word compromise seems like a bad thing, but it really isn't. But
Right.
I'd like to also twist that around and say, choose your own battles very wisely.
Right.
You can win a battle, but lose a war. So if you want to win the war, you have to choose your battles. And that means compromising sometimes. Knowing that you are stepping back, knowing fully well that that's not the way it should be, but because I want to achieve the next step, I have to step back a little bit.
So being strategic really helps. Right. Now, we're going to go into questions and answer really soon. I just have 2 more questions to ask you. I know that you've accomplished so much, especially on, for the Rohingya people, in creating a newfound understanding of our atrocity. But you also faced a lot of backlash and mistreatments, especially throughout the time of your term as the UN Special Rapporteur. If you could give us a glimpse of what that was like and how you overcome the issues that come from the Tatmadaw or the previous NLD administration who barred you from entering Myanmar in the end, and others maybe who just didn't seem to want to cooperate with you. What was that like?
Well, I didn't think I wasn't going to let that stop my work because it was expected. The Tatmadaw or the USDP regime was going to resist my work a lot. But actually, it was the USDP regime that embraced me in the beginning, and they let me visit the places I wanted to, although there was a lot of restrictions. But it was Uratu who started to be very violent, vitriolic messages. And then the NLD came in, and I had hoped that the NLD would really open the doors for human rights realization. But somehow that door was not that quick in opening. And it was actually the NLD that barred me from coming into Myanmar. And I think that because they barred me, I could meet other people in the neighboring countries. When I was in the country, I couldn't go to ethnic states and meet with ethnic armed organizations, EAOs, or even ethnic armed groups. But because I was not allowed in, and I was meeting people outside of Myanmar, they came to me, and I had a better understanding of what the ethnic minorities were going through, the ethnic states, the current status of the situation there, and the conflict there, and the leaders of the ethnic armed organizations. I've had direct contact with them, and so it turned out for the better at the end. See, I always like to believe that, I'm not a very religious person, but when one door closes, another door opens. And just because there is a stumbling block right now doesn't mean there is a detour around it. Mm-hmm. So you have to always look for that detour.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm so glad that you were the one who was in doing your term at that point, and you were in that position to actually listen. I think a lot of my colleagues, a lot of people from Myanmar, Burma have a lot of great things to say about you, especially in your understanding and your willingness to listen. I think there hasn't been, or at least they didn't feel like they were being listened to as much from the system itself, be it internationally or domestically. And so I remember when we actually met in South Korea in 2019, my colleagues, my Korean colleagues and the Shan colleague were talking about how you were extremely discreet in ensuring people's safety, but also ensuring that you're actually getting the accurate information from the people on the ground, or people who are working on this. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of all of us for doing so much and accomplishing so much just within those very, very limited circumstances, and just within the few years for us to get this far. I think it had provided, like your work itself had provided a foundation that I think is unshakable. It's not going to be movable in so many years to come. Now, switching things up, and I think that we're going to end with this question before we open up the floor. At one of the events that you've recently joined in the past months, you quoted the late powerful poet Go Keti from his poems, where he says, "We have to fight to win this battle." And then he writes, "If we lose North Korea, if we win South Korea." What does that mean to you?
Oh gosh, it really struck a chord. If you lose this fight, if you look at what's going on in North Korea, the people are the ones collectively suffering. And in North Korea, there are no ethnic groups. It's all Koreans, but they're suffering from their freedom and their basic human rights. And so here, if you are put under the junta regime again, not only the Karenis, the Karens, the Mons, or the Kachins, or the Rakhines, the Rohingyas will suffer, but all of Myanmar will suffer. Even the Bamas will suffer.
Exactly.
And they will suffer direly. And you can just see what the North Korea is like. Whereas South Korea, we are now one of the top 10 economic powers in the world. In 1950, our country was devastated, war-torn, and it took us about 70 years now to become where we are now, albeit we had 2 military coups. And this is another thing I'd like to share with you, is during U Tensein's period, when I met with the USDP and all their generals and their Tatmadaw, I kept telling them, look at South Korea. We had 2 coups. We were under 2 military coups regimes, almost 20 years, much shorter than Myanmar. But it was only because the military could lay down their guns and rifles, go back to the barracks, and hand over power to the civilian government, that we were able to flourish economically. And they all helped, and the military helped in a way they could to, with the civilians, to build the country. And only when the military laid down their guns and returned to the barracks can a country flourish.
It means that the military should never actually point the gun to its own people.
No.
And I don't know, at this point, I don't think that any one of us can conceive the idea that the Tatmadaw would ever put down their guns and weapons, but at least from your message, from your stories, from your accounts, I think it gives us a little bit of a reminder that better days are yet to come, and perhaps we might see the changes that we might not be able to conceive before. So thank you for sharing that story. And for now, I'm going to turn to the audience, and I would like to ask if you have any questions for Professor Lee, if you have any comments, anything that you would like to ask her, please raise your hand or just drop the questions in the chat box, and then we'll get you to unmute and ask your question. Anyone? So there is a question from Michael Jung. Sorry, Yasser. We're gonna give you the we're gonna actually give you the chance to ask the question next. But if you can unmute yourself for now, I'll call on you just after this one. Michael said that when I work with other child rights activists, I come across instances where they discriminate against certain group of children, example, particular ethnic groups. Do you have effective strategies to convince these activists to look beyond these characteristics and focus on our common goal of working for and with children?
Children, we should focus on the word children or child rather than what's around the child. And that's the only way we can move beyond the differences. We're all different. We have to remember that too. And I don't know if this is the answer you want to hear, but we're all different. And if we focus on the difference of the child, then you're really disputing your own self, because you yourself is different. You know, you look different from others. So some people are tall, some people are short, some people have big eyes, small eyes, you know, but that's okay. It's okay to be different. And what you just said, that some child rights activists will discriminate, then they should not be in that business. Yeah.
Thank you. Brother Yasser, I think you wanted to ask a question. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone. This is Arfat from world largest Rohingya refugee camp. First of all, I would like to thank to Yasmin Ullah, who is inviting us to talk, to listen the great speech about the Rohingya and Myanmar people. Then I would like to thank Yanghee professor to talking about with the Rohingya issue and Myanmar people. So I would like to tell something about the Rohingya issues ongoing the Bangladesh Rohingya refugee camp. So
do you have any question for Professor Lee?
Yeah. So I would like to talk to you, dear Yasminullah. Why Bangladesh government is not allowed to open the formal education in Bangladesh Rohingya refugee camp for Rohingya children under 4 on the way, 5 years is on the way. But Bangladesh government not allowed to open formal education. Also, NGO learning center is open on the way 2 years. Why they should do that? If you lost education, we have lost everything, native and motherland.
Right.
Our we need just education in the camp, not rice.
All right, let me ask Professor Lee to answer that question for you.
Thank you very much. This is a question that I had been asking the government of Bangladesh. I have been pushing them to accept formal education. And they assured me that up to 2nd grade, they will be offering education. And then later on, higher elementary school. And they gave me all kinds of reasons for not giving a formal education. And I had also approached them and I said, why don't you offer them, maybe if you're, the reason was they're afraid that the Rohingyas will integrate into the Bangladesh community. And I said, okay, then don't offer them Bangladesh curriculum. You can offer them Myanmar curriculum, offer them an English education too, so that they can, the children here can become skilled to go wherever into the world with English skill, but following Burmese curriculum. If you're so afraid that the Rohingyas will take up all the space in the job market in Bangladesh, they can go elsewhere, and they have to be skilled to go elsewhere. And then I also said to them, what's important for you is to let them learn their mother tongue too, so that they can communicate with among themselves, but also to be educated in Burmese, so that when they go back to Burma, they can speak and write Burmese. And so that's what I was always pushing for. And I understand recently, one of the international financial institutions said they will give a big sum of money if Bangladesh will provide formal education for the children in the camps. And I think the government has refused to do that so far. Yeah.
Well, I think from all sides, we'll have to continue to push, and I know that Professor Lee is going to try and push for this as well, wherever she can, myself included, and probably all of us would have to do our part. Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to move on to the next questions. If there's anybody who would like to ask, please unmute yourself.
I will send.
Sorry, you're muted. Okay. I don't think that he heard us. So anyone else who would like to ask a question at all? Sorry, Brother Yasser, I'm gonna have to move to another question. Brother Salim wants to ask a question. Let me just unmute you. There you go. Yes, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you for giving a chance. Thank you so much, Yasmin and Yanghee. So my question is that we are living almost 4 years in Bangladesh. So many countries trying to solve our problem to do repatriation. So I don't know who solving our problem. Maybe I think in UN, and also I heard international community. You are working a human rights activist. you know better than me. So I am asking, why need so many years, why need so many times to solve our problem?
That is a very difficult question. And a very right.
Oh, sorry, Professor Lee, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for that question. It's a very difficult question, but it's a rightful question to ask. There was a tripartite decision agreement, and it was between UNHCR, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. But Myanmar did not keep up with its promise, and I'm not sure how much other international communities can do if Myanmar doesn't uphold its promise. Another thing is now there is this unlawful coup that's taking place. This is not the time for repatriation. It will not be a safe time for repatriation at this point. And especially with COVID pandemic, it would be very difficult to access medical medical services in Myanmar, because, as you know, the junta is weaponizing COVID, withholding oxygen cylinders from people, and not accepting patients in the hospitals if you have COVID. And so this is a very, very, very difficult time for any repatriation talks. When there is to be repatriation, it has to be, first of all, voluntary, and it has to be safe. Where you go back to has to be safe, and it has to be sustainable. That means you've got to have guarantees for your livelihoods when you go back, and to the place of origin. Right now, most of the places have been bulldozed over, new constructions put up. So you may not go back to the place of origin. That's a choice that you will have to make. Would it be okay not to go to our place of origin if it's not too far away? But you do not want to go back to an IDP camp. You have to go back to where you can lead a life that is dignified, with rights and with livelihood measures. Some of you, I know in Northern Rakhine, livelihood is fishing. And if you're sent to Central Rakhine, or if you're sent over a place where there is no place where you can go fish and make a living, that's not going to be a sustainable life for you. So these are things that has to be sorted out. And at the same time, justice and accountability must be achieved for the Tatmadaw for doing these crimes. And later on, there has to be restitution. They have to give back or build back your homes that they've destroyed. So this is what the international community has to push for. And we will do our best. There are many people who are fighting to do this, but the international community moves at a snail pace. They don't move, it seems like, but very slowly.
Right. That means that we'll have to keep the pressure coming.
Yes.
And all of us here, I want to thank both of the brothers who've asked very, very pertinent questions. I think your voice, both of your voices are incredibly essential in this, call to action, and ensuring that they're held accountable, whoever is involved. Thank you very much for those two questions. I think that's about time that we have. But
Yasmin, can I say something?
Absolutely, please.
I think it was 2019 when it was in 2019. I've been to Cox's Bazar many times into the camps. And it was at that time when I talked with many groups of the refugees there. And there was times when I would talk with women refugees. And everyone says, we want justice.
Professor Lee, I think you are muted again. I'm not entirely sure what's happening.
I'm not even touching my... How far did you listen? How far did you hear?
I think that you were telling us that you've visited the camps many times.
Many times. And I would meet with men and women, boys and girls. And I was meeting with a group of women. And at that time, many were saying, we want justice. Everyone was saying we want justice. And so I said, what does justice mean to you? Because it may mean different things to different people. There was an elderly woman. She must have been in her 60s. Well, and I asked her, what does justice mean to you? And you know what she said? It really surprised me. And it really is a telling message to all of you. She said, you know, we hear that there is this big court in the UN where the court can judge if you've done wrong. And we want that court to say to Temadol that you've done wrong.
Right.
And this is from an elderly woman. And that's what justice meant for her. And yes, Temadol has to be accounted for. They have to pay for the crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide. And without accountability and justice, there's going to be a cycle of violence continuing again. And this is what happened for the past 70 years in Myanmar.
Exactly. Professor Lee, since we're coming up at an hour mark, there are two other questions that have been asked. Do you have the time to spend with us a little bit longer, or do you? Oh, okay, thank you very much for doing that. From Lisa, and next the last question will be to Sister Yasmin. And from Lisa, she said, can Professor Lee please talk a bit about where she now sees the biggest hope for change in Myanmar now? Whose voices most need amplifying by the media and scholarship?
Okay. The biggest hope is, let's look at what's happening inside Myanmar. It's been more than 6 months, but the people, their resilience and their courage, it is the biggest hope. They are the resistance movement, or what I'd like to call it a democracy movement, is not going to go away. And the Tetmadol is using brutal forces and actions because they're not gaining any ground. And so that's the hope for Myanmar. It's the people. And I think for the first time in 70 years, all of the ethnic states and all the ethnic populations are joining in solidarity together with the Bamas for freedom and democracy. So this democracy movement is now creating another fabric where it's going to be, I'd like to call it a spider's web, where you will be strongly knit together in solidarity.
Right.
All the ethnic minorities and religious groups together for a common goal, which is a free and democratic Myanmar.
That is a very, I think, a really good visualization of what this could look like. A really tight-knit spider web where we all come with our differences and our own, unique identities, but we can all kind of become one without having to sacrifice any part of ourselves. Yeah, that I'm very much hopeful in the same ways that you are. I think Sister Yasmin has her hand up. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can hear my voice. Yeah, thank you for this session. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I just want to know if there is any way, any opportunity for, I think the only refugee camp I have known so far, which is in Bangladesh, there is no resettlement happening for a decade. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know the ultimate goal of Rohingya people, of course, obviously to go back to Burma. That's the ultimate goal. But at the same time, I think there should be some fairness. I know COVID is another reason, but this is prior to COVID, which is 10 years ago. No resettlement has happened from Bangladesh. Is there is any way to have some fairness as well, to have some resettlement from there as well, to build a strong Rohingya community who will later on go back to the country to serve the country, because the population is growing from day to day. So I will be really appreciating if this talk can be done to Bangladesh government to do something about resettlement, because I believe it's from their part not allowing, which is, I think, a bit unfair. Yeah, if something can be done about this, it will be really, really grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When I was the special rapporteur and when I met with the Bangladeshi officials, that was also a topic that I would raise, that Bangladesh should support resettlement for those who want to resettle to other countries and to places where different countries are willing to accept refugees from Cox's Bazar. But they were not absolutely for resettlement to third country. They said, we don't want to send this and this group. You know, the whole refugee Cox's Bazar needs to go back to Myanmar. That's what they were insisting on at that time. Maybe their policy has changed now. And to a certain degree, I can say that by resettling in third countries, you're saying to the Tatmadaw, they can push the Rohingyas out, more Rohingyas out, and then different countries will now take them in. So it's not going to be our concern anymore. And so I think the pressure has to be still on the Tatmadaw, and that they have to receive let all of the refugees go back to where they came from. Yeah, and I'm sure that the new special rapporteur is also engaging with the Bangladesh government on this. And every moment I have, every opportunity I have, I raise the question about the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, the refugees, and in Bhasan Char. I was the only one that was allowed to visit Bhasan Char, and I saw what Bhasan Char was like. And I can empathize with the 2,000 or so that are living in Bhasan Char now, right. How difficult it is there. As you know, a month after the coup started in Myanmar, myself and 2 other colleagues got together and decided to do something. We can't just sit back. You all know Mr. Marzuki Darusman, who used to be the member of the fact-finding mission and the chairperson of the fact-finding mission, and Mr. Chris Sidoti, who was also a member of the fact-finding mission. Mr. Sidoti has been involved in Myanmar issues for more than 25 years. So the 3 of us got together and said, we've got to do something. We've got to try to put pressure on the international community. We've got to bring out the voices of the people from within Myanmar, amplify the voices of all parties in Myanmar to the international world. And so we formed a special advisory council for Myanmar, SACM, as Yasmin had said earlier. If you visit our website, you will see many media statements that we issued, and we've issued several briefing papers. And many of many of them, if not all of our media statements are also translated into Burmese. And our briefing papers are also will be translated into Burmese. And you can write to us, send us any photos through the info address on SATCAM, and we will try to address the different issues that you think that we need to address. We have not forgotten the refugees, and we have not forgotten the people still living in IDP camps. And in Myanmar, I've visited the IDP camps many times in Myanmar too. And so I really think that putting the pressure on the international community is very important, but also putting the pressure inside the different parties in Myanmar. I think it's very encouraging that there is a Rohingya advisor working with Minister Aung Myo Min, the Human Rights Minister. And we hope, and they've also, NUG has also made a statement that they will not recognize the 2008 Constitution, and they are on their way to write a new citizenship law, do away with 1982 citizenship law. There's many laws. The religious protection, race and religious protection law should be banned, rescinded, appealed, repealed immediately too. And also the NUG has written to ICC that they are willing to ratify the Rome Statute dating back to 2002. So it covers all the crimes that the Tatmadaw has committed, and we are now still waiting for ICJ decision. There's been a groundbreaking case in Argentina, the application of universal jurisdiction. Our former Special Rapporteur, Tomas Quintana, and his NGOs have filed a suit to the court in Argentina. And I think our brother Tun Kin has been to Argentina many times. So different pressures are still being put in throughout the world and throughout different mechanisms.
Well, I think that sort of concludes it for us for the session today, and you've already laid it out for us of what call to actions we might need to involve ourselves in. And I kind of shared the Special Advisory Council's website, as well as I just shared the screen just earlier. It might have startled you. That was what the website looks like. And before we leave today, I would like to actually touch on the next few speakers. You've all heard a lot from Professor Lee today. She's a human rights champion, and she has faced so many challenges and still decided to resist and resiliently dedicate her life to helping others. This is a very common experience among women in all parts of the world, ridden with conflicts and political instability, that we rise to the occasion and resist against a tide of injustices. As we move along in our conversation in the last two sessions, I hope that in our own capacity, we would be able to encourage, support, and rally around these women. I know that Professor Lee has a lot of support already, but I think that more support doesn't hurt. And, you know, I think it's important for us to support the women that have been on this webinar series, but also the women outside of this, whose works have been the driving forces of so many wonderful social changes. And with that, please stay tuned for the next week's webinars registration information. Let me just quickly share the screen with for you to actually take a look at the posters. So next week on Monday, we have a conversation with mental health professional Ma Phu Banukin. She is a PhD candidate on clinical psychology, and she will come on the session to tell us how to cope, how to navigate the crisis that we're having, that we cannot, control, but how do we navigate that and cope mentally? So she has a lot of that to share with us. And then the following day, Tuesday, we will have a conversation with Wei Wei-nu. All of you know her very well already. She's a wonderful human rights activist and women's rights activist in the Rohingya community and in Myanmar, Burma in general. And she'll be talking about our collective rights to be recognized, to be respected, to be given, the proper care that we need, and the state protection that we need from Myanmar, Burma. So with that, I would like to thank you all once again for joining us today. There will be registration links for the next two events shared just now on the chat. And I would like to thank Professor Lee again for joining us today, and thank you everybody for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Professor Lee, and I hope that in the near future we can have another dialogue like this, because I think you have a lot more to share as well. Thank you everyone. Have a great night. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.